Welcome to Australian Taekwondo Talk, where we meet the people who make our martial art great. Brought to you by Ageless Taekwondo, part of the Move It Oz initiative, a modified program for over 65s that's accessible, affordable and implemented in a community setting. Stay tuned to find out how you or a loved one can get involved.
What can happen when cultures collide on a Taekwondo mat? How does an Asian martial art translate to Australian indigenous culture and sensibility? Perhaps more than anyone else in the world, Tony Paganella has asked that question and found a few answers. The 4th Dan Taekwondo instructor from the East Gippsland Club has taken qualifications in personal fitness training and oriental therapies to give young people, and many young indigenous Australians, a depth of understanding beyond punching and kicking. But how and why would he do that? Welcome to Australian Taekwondo Talk, Tony Paganella.
Thanks for calling out.
Is that an Italian name?
Yeah, the story goes that my great-grandfather came in the early 1930s and didn't return back to Italy, and the next generation followed him out. We've lived here ever since, so that was since the early 1950s.
Did you have a lot of Italian culture in your childhood?
Absolutely, yeah. I grew up in East Gippsland in Victoria, in the beautiful seaside resort of Lakes Entrance, and we have a lifestyle down here and have been in the hospitality trade as a family for many years, and we've been able to welcome lots of international visitors, and I guess that's what sparked my interest in things other than Italian.
Which is curious that you're already, I guess, exposed to the idea of multiple cultures connecting, but we'll get to that in due course. How did a first-generation Australian Italian get involved in Taekwondo?
Anybody from my era, I'm now 50 years old, and back in the day when I was a young fella, the main things that we were exposed to was Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, and David Carradine. So, like most people, television and movies played a big part, but also being in a regional area, football and cricket and tennis were the mainstays in the town for the socialisation and development of young people. And it just so happened that a guy showed up one day in Lakes Entrance and opened up a Taekwondo club, 15 at the time, and basically never looked back.
It's remarkable how many people I talk to of approximately your vintage who entered the dragon via Bruce Lee. There was just a moment in time that captured the imagination of, in particular, young men of a certain age, right? I'm not sure current generations fully appreciate what a phenomenon that was in the culture at the time.
It was a huge phenomenon, and Bruce Lee is still spoken about today as we are. But I think cultures have shifted quite a bit. We're exposed to a lot more information. I think the fact that at that time we didn't have as much information available to us, and anything that was new was absorbed, and we investigated and we tried and we did a whole heap of stuff. And I think that's what our kids are doing now. Now that we're in a situation where kids are in so-called lockdown because of the virus, they have the opportunity to do a lot more research, and there's a lot more stuff going on in their lives that is not visible to everybody else, but they are answering questions by themselves, as we did when we were looking at Bruce Lee and examples of being fit and healthy and trying things new and exciting.
The other thing that you mentioned there that I think might not be appreciated by everybody is that being in rural or regional Australia in the 70s and 80s, there wasn't a tsunami of new things arriving in town every day. There could be long periods of not very exciting things going on. And so I imagine the Taekwondo club must have been this exotic arrival, was it, from the East?
Oh, absolutely. It was interesting. Like everything, it was something that was different for most people, and obviously people had a preconceived idea on what Taekwondo was, in fact, what martial arts was all about, because it offered a different look at a cultural practice. It allowed people to be physically assertive without being angry, which was quite different than being in a typical sport where you saw acts of aggression and, it was seen as just blowing off steam, maybe on the football field. youthfulness, if you like. But when it came to being in a training hall, back in the day, it's always been the old town halls. There was some discipline involved, and there was an etiquette and a respect for those around you. And if you were ever in a situation of lacking of control or being aggressive, it was pulled up pretty quick.
What appealed to you about that? So clearly you had this instinct of wanting to express some aggression, but the discipline also appealed to you?
Oh, absolutely. The discipline was I think the discipline is what actually kept me there. I think like most people that are seeking martial arts and Taekwondo are probably saying, I feel a little bit insecure. How can I be more confident? And at the time I was growing up as a young fellow who, hormones are raging like all the teens. And there's always that bravado, that boyish bravado. For me, out on the football field, even though there are rules on how you conduct yourself, you just never knew when you were being confronted. So I thought, well, and the fact that I was always getting injured. So I went to martial arts and it was crazy that I wasn't getting as injured, but I was doing something that was obviously in the line of fighting and self-defense. So it was a real paradigm shift for me in how I was thinking about staying healthy, being the best person I could be at the time.
How long had you been in Taekwondo when you knew this was something you were going to get serious about?
Well, that was almost immediate, to be honest.
Was it?
Yeah, for me, I was actually waiting for somebody to do something. As a younger person, I think I was 10 or 11, I actually tracked down an old sparring partner of one of my uncles who was a boxer, lives in Lakes Entrance. And I just hounded him for a couple of years on just how should I train, how should I fight. And really in our Anglo-Saxon culture that we have here in Australia, boxing was quite acceptable, and a well-trained boxer was quite well respected. So for me, I was looking at what can I do, how can I do this, and there was no opportunity for a person my age to actually be involved in martial arts. Not like it is today, where you're taking kids, 8-year-olds to a boxing gym. The parameters around engagement for a young person now is way different to what it was when I was a younger person.
You set about your black belt almost immediately. That became the prize that you had your eye on?
Yeah, I actually remember shocking my instructor by the typical question that I seem to get by my students: how long does it take to become a black belt?
And what was the answer? Can you remember what he said?
He sort of looked at me and took a step back, and he wasn't quite sure on where I was coming from. And he actually took the time to set out the process of the amount of gradings, and he worked out that it was going to take, if I trained on a regular basis and didn't stop and just kept going, at least 4 years. And I said, okay. And I worked it out, and I thought, that will be when I do my VCE in year 12. It's great.
Yes.
I'll be a black belt by the time I'm 18. I thought, wow, that's awesome. That's what kept me going.
And did you succeed?
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, obviously you got your black belt.
Yeah.
Did you succeed by 18?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it was, I think at the time I was probably one of the youngest first people to grade here in this area to first dan black belt. But we had a very good camaraderie in the club. At the time, it was very male dominated. There were lots of men. And for me, that was wonderful, because I needed male role models at that time. Although I had positive role models in my life, having men who I didn't know come to training and guide you and support you and have a common interest and a banter that was positive. They actually formed some really good guidelines for me in decisions that I was making as I moved forward through the belt levels. So it was brilliant.
Once you had your black belt and you were no longer 18 and you were deciding what you wanted to contribute to the world, that was in play in your decision making, I assume, that you wanted to be that man for other people?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. You're right, it is formative years and what you can actually pay back. I think by the time I was 18, I was in a situation of, okay, what am I going to do with myself? I've done VCE. What do I do from here? And my family, we've not had anybody do tertiary studies. And I was the first person to even consider doing tertiary studies. But that gap year, I actually took off. I didn't go to tertiary education from that point. I knew that I, at some stage, needed to, but I'd had enough of study, and martial arts was the thing for me. And I actually was invited to train with my head instructor. And I went and started training with him 4 to 5 nights a week. And on weekends, I'd work in the family business, and I'd travel 2 hours to get to work and then travel back for training and live near where training was in the Latrobe Valley.
Were you in the headspace that you were working on a career at that point, or was it just a hobby, a sport that you were diving deep on?
For me, it actually wasn't a sport. For me, it was actually a career choice. I knew I actually wanted to become an instructor, and I knew that I needed to branch out and experience more and drill deep on the knowledge. And that's probably why I ended up going down the remedial therapy in Oriental therapies with shiatsu and becoming a personal trainer over the years and becoming qualified as a life coach. All these things have basically fed off that original interest in becoming a black belt. And what does black belt mean?
There is a proud tradition in martial arts generally, and Taekwondo in particular, that one goes on your own journey of learning and discovery, and then one reinvests that in future generations. At what point did that transition happen for you?
Once I'd actually done that step, I took that step and trained full time with my head instructor. I realised after a year of training that to become a well-rounded person that could actually be successful as an instructor, I needed a few qualifications behind me that would support me. So I ended up in Melbourne, and as things tend to go, I became involved in study and developed a career in business and marketing, and the martial arts took a bit of a back seat whilst I was doing that. And I got to a point in my life that I thought, I'm doing all the things that I sought out to do, and there came a crunch time, and I was about 24, and decided that 60 hours a week of city life was a little bit out of balance with my values. And I was married at the time. We'd been overseas, and we'd come back, and I had a business happening in Melbourne, and decided to sell out and move back to East Gippsland. We didn't really want to start a family in Melbourne. We knew what was available in East Gippsland. And I went back to my head instructor and said, I'm coming back. I'd like to instruct, and basically resume training and set out on a pretty rigorous get back into shape regime, and then began a club 3 months later. And that was the start of me on a 25-year journey that is celebrated this year of having an East Gippsland martial arts club with Taekwondo and Hapkido.
Congratulations. That's quite the achievement and quite a remarkable story. In many ways, what you described there is something of a midlife crisis in your mid-20s. Right?
That's right.
A lot of people get to 50 before they have that crunch moment and make the big decision and say, I've wasted too many years not true to my values. You did that at 24.
Yeah, it was a decision time. It's one of those turning points in life for me. My wife and myself knew the type of lifestyle that was available in East Gippsland, and we knew that raising a family in Melbourne wasn't for us. Things have certainly changed over 25 years. We've made regular trips with martial arts to Melbourne, and we've raised 2 young men who have not quite left the nest, but certainly have their own careers.
Are they into martial arts?
Both of them became age champions as black belts, and the eldest is a qualified boat builder and is not into martial arts at the moment. And the other one is a nurse who is into martial arts, is going for his 3rd Dan sometime next year.
Fantastic. Where did the expansion into the indigenous community come?
That's an interesting story. So to set up a regional club, like any club, it's about being out there and being seen. And over the years, I developed an in-school program. And the in-school program basically is now being developed by Australian Taekwondo, which is awesome. Through the years of experience, I had invitations to particular schools that had high populations of Aboriginal students. A little town by the name of Now had a high population of Aboriginal kids, and they kept getting me out there to do training with them. And the natural ability of some of these kids was outstanding. The whole idea of being allowed to punch and kick and not getting into trouble for it was a little bit foreign to all the kids that I trained with. And in fact, it was a bit of a challenge for the schools to actually let a martial artist into the school because of the very fact of the nature of the movements being seen as quite aggressive. So for me to open up those doors, it was very much about personal development, checking with the kids that they're okay, and not being intimidated by somebody's actions and how they interpret what people say and do is as important as, what actually does happen.
Just before we explore that further, it's a theme that's already emerged a couple of times in this conversation, and it does in most every conversation that I have about Taekwondo and or martial arts, and that is we are constantly fighting false perceptions about what it is that we do and what is going on when martial arts are being engaged in.
That's just a little bit of the unknown. People, it's a new paradigm for a lot of people to willingly engage in contact, controlled contact, hopefully. I guess what I alluded to earlier, as a younger fella, I was getting injuries on the football field, not because they were intentional, but more that they were by accident. How you mark a ball and jar your fingers, and how you twist your ankle or do your knee or tear a hamstring. These are accidental things, not something that you seek to do. You keep your eye on the ball and you play the game, but you do get injuries because somebody else is playing the game as well. And this is the thing with martial arts, we're totally cognizant of keeping our distance and knowing our comfort zones and proximity and speed and control and accuracy. And this is where, I guess, for me, when I first started training with my head instructor on a full-time basis, it became very clear because I remember him saying that you can play any sport you like, you'll never be a martial artist, but you could be a martial artist and play any sport well.
Contact is not violence. Contact can be violent, but contact and violence are not the same thing. And I guess that's where a lot of the education lies, both with young people, but also just with the institutional attitudes to martial arts.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, we've come a real long way over the last 25 years of me being involved in schools. I've seen other organisations with physical activity programs that have been welcomed into schools, and they have the tools in place to run all sorts of games, whether they be ball games or contact games or athletic, but they actually have very strict guidelines on how they deliver those games. And it was really pleasing to see, I guess about 10 years ago, that an organisation had put together, I think it was the AIS, to be honest, put together some resources, and in it was a couple of martial arts, being Taekwondo, Judo, and I believe karate. But there were games that were acceptable to be facilitated at primary school. And I thought, well, we've come a long way.
Much more going on than Bruce Lee, even if he is the gateway drug for a certain demographic.
Well, that's right. That's right. And, like Bruce Lee, I still see him on social media. There's always something coming up with Bruce Lee. And it surprises me because when I mention Bruce Lee to some of my junior students, they've got absolutely no idea who I'm talking about. And, it's interesting because the participants in martial arts today range from such a young age to the other end where, with Australian Taekwondo doing our ageless Taekwondo program. It's fantastic, we have, over the years, I've moved into the oriental therapy space and done a little bit of Tai Chi within some of the things that I've done. And it's always come back to my martial arts knowledge and the Taekwondo that I started with. And it's always been a really positive base in order to get people active and acknowledging what they have the ability to do and get them excited about movement.
As somebody who is a life coach, trained in oriental therapies, trained in personal fitness, has had this cross-cultural exposure, growing up Italian, rural Australian, the indigenous work, the Asian cultures that you've been immersed in. What picture of what drives people and what wisdom have you drawn from being able to map all those different perspectives over, 50 years of life on this earth?
That's a really good question. And look, what I've seen over the years, particularly in martial arts, is that people get very excited about participating in martial arts. For those that show up to a training centre and get involved, the light bulb goes on. They find a new way of being. For me, what I see is at the heart of everything that an individual does, they need to be authentic in what it is that they're trying to achieve. If you enter into the martial arts space wanting to hurt people, you won't be there for long.
That just proves true over and over and over, doesn't it?
Correct. And there are very few people that will instruct someone to a high level, knowing that that's at the heart of why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, they're just a fish out of water. They come expecting one thing, and that's just not what it is.
Correct. So there is a misalignment and a realization that happens, and either they work through that and stay with you, or they move on and try and find it, somewhere else. To answer your question, at the heart of everything is certainly people's values and their culture that they've been brought up with, and the culture that they would like to develop in their relationships with other people. That's, I think, at the very heart of what Black Belt is all about, that relationship that we share and we foster with other people, not one of fear, but one of mutual camaraderie and development and care.
Do you see that tension or that challenge is as real in Western culture as it is in Asian culture, as it is in indigenous culture? Do we share that challenge in common?
Working from a base of being European, where family culture is paramount, and then working within the Aboriginal space for over a decade and developing programs within the community, family values, incredibly important. And all the different cultures that influence what is Australian today, we all have our own backgrounds, and we bring a very important mix to what is Australian. We do need to celebrate that. We need to celebrate our differences and respect the differences. But at the underlying all of that is our basic need to be connected with each other. And I think we're at a cusp of the realization of that through society across the world with what we're facing today with the coronavirus. At the end of the day, we will only survive if we band together and support each other. And Taekwondo is one of those activities that allows you to practice by yourself to be your best self and bring your best self to the game. And that's an exciting future ahead if we all do that.
The idea of the individual pursuit, but within the context of, to use your words, a family, a Taekwondo family.
Absolutely. And this is the thing that really won me over when I did train full time early on. That my instructor, who obviously had a big impact on my life, the first night of training, welcomed me and said, "Welcome to the family." And it wasn't his personal family; it was his martial arts family. We have something in common. We want to help each other. We want to learn and grow, and we're not going to do it by ourselves.
You've mentioned the significant birthday coming up for your club, but you continue to be involved in developing young people outside of the club. What are you doing?
Yeah, well, I've been very fortunate that through consistency of martial arts and people acknowledging that this is what I do. I work with youth and I work with people who like to maintain their youthfulness. I've been offered the opportunities over the years to develop programs. So with the Aboriginal community, I worked with a great team of people across the region that offered physical activity opportunities and personal development opportunities, everything from surfing out at Cape Conran through to basketball across East Gippsland and Victoria. Obviously, the football played big. I actually also was able to get some of our Olympic athletes, Carmen Martin, Safon and Jack, and Caroline, all over to Lakes, little old Lakes entrance to train with our youth over the last 3 years. And that was a bit of a career goal for me, to expose our local population to that caliber of athlete and martial artist. And we've been very fortunate to get that support. For the decade prior, it was all about our students training up and making that 4-hour trip for a match on the mat in Melbourne. To spend 8 hours travelling for maybe 10 minutes of activity is hard yards. And so we made that commitment for over a decade. At the moment, we do regional events, and fortunately our club is at a point where we can actually do regional events with the sparring and the forms, and we do our self-defence, and we hold seminars, regular seminars for all levels. So some exciting times ahead, given the fact that we have the resources, and when people are able to meet again, hopefully we can hold some larger events and do some invitationals to clubs around Australia to come and train with us. But in the meantime, we do, like most clubs, we are doing the online classes. They're not for everybody, but certainly those that are willing and able to jump online, we offer classes online during this time.
What, after 25 years, do you think your club is to your community?
Well, firstly, I hope they'd know that we're there. It's interesting because after 25 years of instructing, you develop a little bit of an opportunity to stand back and reflect on the growth and expansion and the challenges over that time. We can boast humbly that our students have presented themselves honourably as black belts and developed as black belts. We have over 100 students that have graded to black belt in that time. We have students that have competed for Australia overseas. We have quite a few students that have done the state tournaments and done very well. It was always heartening to take country kids to the city and give them the experience that they were on par, and in some cases ahead of par, when it came to a match on court. When somebody goes into a cafe and asks about Taekwondo, I would hope they say, yep, they train almost every day of the week, and here's his number.
Go and join. It'll enrich your life.
That's right. But, this is the thing. We're fortunate that we have 2 locations, one in Bairnsdale and one in Lakes Entrance, that operates, 4 days a week, and we do Fridays and Saturdays from time to time on a specialised program, whether it be self-defence or advanced training or sparring. But fortunately now I have black belts that are stepping up and taking that leadership role for the last 3 to 4 years, actually, which has been wonderful because it's given me the ability to stand back, like you say, and say, well, as a leader of the club, how can I help my students grow? And for me, it was one of those points in my career where I said, my black belts can't move beyond me unless I allow them to. And creating those opportunities of stepping up and becoming coaches and getting those qualifications to coach, and then giving them the opportunity to instruct. And now, I can go into the club now, and I still train 4 days a week, but I don't take the lead role. And I am quite heartened by sometimes I can walk into the training session and there's a new student that I hadn't met yet. And it's like, wow, it is happening without me.
Do you ever wonder who you'd be if you'd stayed in that marketing job in Melbourne?
I think I'd be a very depressed individual if I had stayed in that job.
Really?
I do.
No regrets?
No, absolutely no regrets. Absolutely no regrets for not staying in Melbourne and pursuing a corporate life. I had achieved all I wanted to achieve in that space and sold out of the business, and it was a turning point for me because I really have used all those marketing skills in what I do in this regional space. I've continued my studies, and like everything, if you don't continue to grow, you really go backwards, and life becomes very mundane. So yeah, every year there's always something to learn. Every training session, a new student would teach me something that I may not have considered. There's always an opportunity to learn something and become a better version of yourself.
In other words, we come from many different cultures, but we make the culture of the future as well, don't we?
Oh, look, I couldn't agree with that more. Culture is very dynamic, and it needs to be alive because it basically is about the people who are developing and expressing values. And it's really important to have our set values that we have: courtesy, integrity, indomitable spirit, perseverance, all the traditional things that I first experienced as a student, early student of Taekwondo, and then going on and seeing how they play out over the course of your life and how you truly express being a black belt, not just the punching and the kicking.
Well, at a time when many people are having their midlife crisis, you are having your midlife celebration of a series of wonderful achievements and perhaps most critically, a life of success that has passed on wisdom to others. I've absolutely loved catching up with you today. Enjoy your upcoming celebrations. I hope that everybody gets to get out and celebrate in the traditional style in due course. And thank you so much for being a part of Australian Taekwondo Talk.
That's awesome, Aaron. Thank you so much for the opportunity and having a chat with me. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honour. Thank you.
Tony Paganella.
Now let's learn more about Ageless Taekwondo, part of the Move It Oz initiative.
About this time each episode of Australian Taekwondo Talk, we take a moment to learn a little bit more about the exciting and innovative new program that is rolling out across Australia, Ageless Taekwondo. It is familiar in many ways, but it also is distinct in many ways and quite unique in the way it is executed. And one of the things that we hope that you take away from this discussion is the sense that there are a lot of resources and a lot of encouragement for you to get involved with Ageless Taekwondo. But we're going to imagine for today's episode that we do in fact have a local community that is interested. We have organised for an Ageless Taekwondo program to roll out in our centre, and we know that there's half a dozen people going to turn up, for argument's sake, on Wednesday morning. What happens next? Ben Exton is Australian Taekwondo's participation manager, and he oversees the rollout of this program, and he's with us once again on Australian Taekwondo Talk. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Aaron.
So I'm imagining that moment, and of course, no one's going to get to this moment without the support of the Ageless Taekwondo program, but I'm imagining the 70-year-olds that are smiling and laughing and coming through the door of the club. How do we turn that gathering of people into an Ageless Taekwondo session?
Yeah, so hopefully on the Wednesday, if you've got 12 people coming in, you've already spoken to them all individually, and you might have even seen them face to face. And it's really important that before they come or when they come for the first class, you do a physical activity readiness questionnaire, which a lot of people will be familiar with at their clubs, or some kind of screen just to get their physical background, their medical conditions, things like that. And we supply that on the website. We use the Exercise and Sports Science Australia one, which is really easy to follow. And at the end of carrying it out, it will tell you what risk category they're in. And if they're in the wrong too riskier category, you need to send them off to their GP to get GP clearance. And a lot of them will come with GP clearance, like you might have spoken to them first as well. So once you've done that, the next thing you need to do in the first session is just do some basic testing. Why we do some basic testing is because this program is funded by Sport Australia, and we need to kind of demonstrate some kind of pre and post improvements from the program. I've provided 2 tests in the instructor guide. You can do 1 or 2. It might just be easier doing 1. 1 is just a simple balance test, and the other is a sit to stand test. So they'd sit in a chair or something at their knee height or just above. For 30 seconds, they sit to stand, and you just count as many reps. So the premise with both of them is that you might retest them in 8 weeks' time or at the end of your program or whatever, and you can see some kind of improvement that we could attribute to the class. Both these tests have been chosen because there's a lot of research around them, and they're used in the clinical exercise physiology world, so they can really correlate improvements in these tests with improvements in falls prevention or general strength and things like that. So you do the screen, you do the tests, and then you get into the class. And that's basically the initial bit. And then you need to do that for all new participants. So some participants might come in, 2 weeks after the program started. But again, you just need to get that baseline. That's really important. And then you could retest it at whatever intervals you want, as long as you note that in the feedback you give to me.
I know this is a particular expertise of yours, but I've witnessed it firsthand as well. Even though that monitoring process is often perceived as something of a chore, there can be a real sense of achievement because it's a way to quantify that what you are doing for people is making a difference in their lives. When you actually get a result from it, it's quite uplifting, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. Especially if you kind of explain in layman's terms what I just said to the participants. Like you say, they might come in and stand on one leg for 5 seconds, and then at the end of your Ageless Taekwondo initial program, they might be able to stand for 20 seconds. They'll get a huge buzz out of that because that's improving their capacity and their ability and things like that. And you can tell them that improvement will help you with your balance, or, research has shown that will improve your balance and you'll reduce your risk of falls, and give them that day-to-day confidence just in how they approach their lives.
Which raises an important point around the role of education in the Ageless Taekwondo program, because I think it's sometimes challenging for younger people to fully comprehend that the dietary advice, the level of knowledge about kilojoules in and kilojoules out, even some of the biometric information that young people are used to having at their fingertips these days were completely non-existent for these people when they were younger. So we shouldn't assume that there is a high level of nutritional and physical knowledge. This is an opportunity to explain very personally and for great benefit why this stuff matters for older Australians.
Yeah, very much so. So in the instructor guide, we provide a bit of a list and some stuff from Department of Health around the benefits of physical activity. But unlike the previous episode where I talked about the national messages and the need to reiterate the same ones, I think it's important with the benefits of sport and physical activity that you use the terms that are most likely to benefit or get through to the group you have at that point in time. So you might find that your current group are all women and they're really worried about their bone density and the risk of fractures and that. So you really need to frame what they're doing in the Ageless Taekwondo class around the benefits for that. And another key point with this demographic is telling them, and this is something I found in the past, both anecdotally as well, that it's not about doing hard sessions all the time, which they have a lot of fear around, that they're going to have to come in and work really hard. It's about just working at a low to moderate intensity consistently, little and often over the long haul is what I'd say to them.
It's a theme that comes through in Australian Taekwondo talk. Even when you're talking to people who've spent a whole lifetime around Taekwondo, there remains some preconceived ideas about what goes on at a Taekwondo club, and that's probably only going to be exponentially more true in a conservative, older demographic who've had no exposure to this.
Oh yeah, definitely. So like we've mentioned before, it's really about reframing what they're doing in the Ageless Taekwondo class. It might even be good to chat to them if someone calls you and they're interested in coming, and find out what their perception of what they might do and then really reframe it. As we've said before, some instructors are not even using the word Taekwondo. They're saying it's this new learning activity or this falls prevention class where we use Taekwondo, basic Taekwondo exercises. So that's one way you can approach it.
Working on your sharpness.
Exactly.
You remind me as you say that as well. There's a real opportunity at that point of contact, not only to get an extra customer, but perhaps to get that first customer over the line, is do encourage a buddy system as well. People often feel a lot more comfortable if they're not flying solo. Some people have no choice but to fly solo, and that might be why they're finding you. But there is value in saying, and is there anyone else in your world who might be interested in joining you or who could drive you here or that kind of thing? You'll often find that they bring a crowd with them if you handle that really well. And part of that is about selling the benefit. Theoretically, If they were passionate about doing Taekwondo, they would have been doing it for the last 50 years. So, in fact, it's the outcome that is the appeal, not the process, at least until you get them in the door, Ben.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, for this demographic, as we've said, the risk of falling or falling's top of their mind a lot of the time. So you can just say this program really focuses on falls prevention and improving your ability to catch yourself if you fall, or just improving your reflexes and things like that. So, and then after that, I think it's more around the general physiological benefits of, your cardiovascular health, or your bone loading, or improving some muscle mass, or just improving your capacity to enjoy your life day to day. You could say this is going to help with your golf, or this will get you back bushwalking again, things like that. But yeah, it's definitely, you need to reframe it around what they're most worried about, and go from there, I think.
We keep saying it, but it remains true. There are lots of resources to support you if you are an instructor in this process. And if you are a listener who is interested in perhaps participating in Ageless Taekwondo, then likewise, either call your local club, just search it up, or get in contact with us at Australian Taekwondo, and we'll do everything in our power to try and facilitate you finding your way onto a mat somewhere and staying sharper and having a better quality of life the longer it goes. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thanks, Aaron.
We'll talk again next episode, and thank you for being with us on Australian Taekwondo Talk for this episode. Wherever you found us, whether it was via Apple Podcasts, Google, we're on Spotify, so if you're used to listening through the smart speaker on Spotify, you can find us there as well. Wherever you found Australian Taekwondo Talk, please give it your support. Please give it a review or a star rating, simply for the reason that it helps other people find it. The companies that run these podcasts put them in front of other people if they are supported by you. It's as simple a process as that. And of course, you can hands-on share it around. Make sure that your friends and other people in Taekwondo are aware that it exists, and get to enjoy these conversations and the sense of community and the people who are working in that community of Taekwondo across Australia. Thanks for your company once again on Australian Taekwondo Talk.
For more information on how you can get involved with Ageless Taekwondo and a whole lot more, head to ostkd.com.au. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram too. Thanks for being a part of Australian Taekwondo Talk.